very much appreciate your time and efforts as committee members. We very well understand that being a committee member means a lot of work. And because of the corona situation, I'm afraid it is even more effort and work for you. So on behalf of NWO, thank you very, very much. And now I will share the program with you. So I hope you can all see. So this is the program. I hope you can all see it clearly. Um, First of all, Jan de Boer, the chairman of the NWO Domain Science and member of the executive board, will give an introduction, including some words about new ways of recognition and rewards for academics, the new NWO strategy, probably, and a few words about the domain-wide assessment. I myself will give an overview of the Vidi procedure. Eva Blokker will focus on the criterion scientific and or societal impact, and that's new in this round. We will show you a movie about this, and thereafter we will show you another movie. So there are two movies during this session about assessing inclusively, and my colleague Evelien Mescher will explain what we mean by this. About 10 minutes past 11, we will close the plenary session and have a short break, maybe 10, 15 minutes. And around 11:25, there will be 3 separate breakout sessions for further questions and to meet with the other committee members and NWO staff. And within these sessions, you will have more opportunities to interact, to ask questions. And yeah, I would also like to invite experienced committee members to share their experiences from previous rounds with the new committee members. So we will divide you in 3 groups along the lines of the future interview clusters, and I will explain these clusters later. My colleagues, the Vidi secretaries, and myself will host and guide these sessions. So Evelien, Maureen, Loes, Cindy, Alexander, Joyce, Theodore, and I will be happy to answer any questions. Okay, so now I would like to give the floor to Jan de Boer. Jan is the chair of the domain science and a member of the NWO executive board. And Jan is also professor of theoretical physics at the University of Amsterdam. Jan, the floor is yours, and I will stop sharing my screen now. Okay.
All right, thanks, Eric. First of all, I'd like to echo the words of Eric and express my gratitude to all of you that you're willing to participate in evaluating the Vidi applications. It's an important funding instrument for NWO, and without your help, it would be impossible to have rounds of this type. So thank you very much. The second thing I'd like to say is that we're constantly trying to tweak, improve, and optimize all our funding instruments, including the Vidi. So if any time during the whole Vidi process you have suggestions for improvements or things that you could think could be done better or differently, don't hesitate to let the program managers know about your suggestions. We always collect all those suggestions. And although we are not always able to provide individual feedback on all the input that we get, rest assured that we do collect all your input and we do critically look at it once or twice per year. And we try to take as much on board from your useful input as possible. Then in these few minutes that we have, I'd like to maybe quickly go through 3 points. The first point is that in NWO, we're right now working on making a new strategy for the period 2023 until 26. I could say a lot about it, but I don't think that's a useful way to spend our precious time here this morning. As far as the talent scheme goes, I think the most likely outcome of the strategy process is that the talent scheme as we know it today will continue with minor modifications in the next strategy period. We have asked around and we have brainstormed about more drastic modifications of the talent scheme. But the conclusion so far, based on consultations with the field, including people like you, is that there is a lot of appreciation for the current form of the talent scheme. That although a few things could maybe be improved, a more drastic modification of the talent scheme is not something the field is eagerly awaiting. So most likely the talent scheme in its current form will continue mostly unchanged for the next strategy period. The second thing I'd briefly like to comment on is this notion of a domain-wide assessment. We very often get feedback from committee members that they end up looking at proposals that are a bit far away from their own expertise. That's true. However, one has to keep in mind that there are various interests that have to be optimized in these processes. And in the science domain, we have chosen for this particular form of domain-wide assessment for very good reasons, I think. First of all, we have also based on the experience from the last few years, we have staggered the variant talent scheme funding instruments as much as possible in such a way that at every step in the process, we try to cluster proposals together. So that at least you get things that are in the same field together in the same group. But importantly, if we were going to go back to a system where we would have only proposals within disciplines or within subdisciplines with hard walls in between, that first of all would lead to a very strange situation because some fields are much larger than other fields. Within some fields, people already find it difficult to evaluate proposals. And there is a huge call that NWO should facilitate interdisciplinary research. And we also notice in practice that the boundaries between disciplines get more and more blurred as time goes by. So I think it would be, making a step backwards if we would reinstate hard borders between different disciplines and try to allocate certain a priori fixed amounts of funding to all these disciplines and so on. That would just be doing, making a step backwards in time, I think. I do realize that this leads to a situation that if you're in a committee, you might end up having to look at or review proposals that are a bit further away from your own field. It might be somewhat unsatisfactory because you feel you're not an expert. But I think it's not like either you're an expert or you're not an expert. You're like very much an expert, somewhat of an expert, a bit less of an expert, or maybe no expert at all. It's like a continuous spectrum of possibilities. I think there's also some reward in trying to look at proposals that are a bit further away from your own expertise because it broadens your perspective on science. And moreover, there's always the advice from the referees who are supposed to be the true experts on the proposal anyway. I'm sure we could talk about this whole domain-wide assessment procedure for hours and hours, but I just wanted to indicate what the main considerations were for the board of the science domain to choose this particular form for the talent scheme. Then the third thing and last thing I wanted to say a few things about is this discussion about recognizing and rewarding science, and in particular the notion of a narrative CV. So this is a subject which has been getting a lot of media attention lately. And unfortunately, the media attention is starting to take the same form as the type of media attention that many other subjects are getting. Namely, what you see is a certain polarization in the media of like a small extreme anti-group and a small extreme pro-group that sort of dominate exchanges in the media. And this seems to be a common phenomenon in almost any subject that you can imagine right now. And the second common feature that we see in the recognizing and rewarding debate is the use of incorrect information. And that makes the whole debate as it's being publicly fought, if you want right now, rather strange. So first of all, it's fine to have opinions about all these things, but please use the right facts. And if you participate in these discussions, do not use false facts and fake news and things like that, because it's just not helpful, right? We are all scientists, and we should try to use facts rather than fake news in our debate. Recognizing and rewarding is, I think, an important step forward in the way we look at science and what is good science and what's not good science. So I think we have a pretty clear picture of what we want to achieve. Maybe we don't have quite as a clear picture of how we want to achieve it. And especially on the how side of things, that things are very much in progress and being changed and improved on and discussed. But I think the what question is not something that is very much under debate right now. So the point of this new vision on recognizing and rewarding is that we want to have a broader view on what good science is. Historically, good science was very often measured with a few simple numbers and a few simple indicators. And that was all there was to it. And you had like an itemized CV, and then there was a lot of bias in that system, which meant that certain groups had a major advantage in that system and other groups had a major disadvantage. And also scientific achievements, which are less amenable to be put in lists or to be put in numbers, had a hard time in this particular configuration. Because, for example, if you wrote a very useful piece of software for the scientific community, it was hard to put it in the right way on a CV and get the right amount of credit for it. If you built a large database of useful information for science, it was hard to put it on a CV, get credit for it, etc. On the other hand, there was a lot of like noise in all these CVs by people just claiming to have N publications in whatever journals. It's very hard to gauge those numbers correctly. So with recognizing and rewarding science, we want to first of all move away from facts without context to facts with context. And to second of all, allow a broader set of facts to be included in the discussion. So that's an important change compared to the situation that was there before. And the plan is that with this, we will have a better way to assess excellent science. The purpose is not, and let me emphasize one of those fake news items. So NWO is all about science. So the only thing we evaluate, for example, in the talent scheme, is scientific quality. If someone applies for a grant in the talent scheme, whether or not people have done teaching is in principle unimportant unless it's directly relevant for the research program. If someone is an excellent tap dancer, that's fantastic, but it's irrelevant unless it's relevant for the research program, which is probably very unlikely. This is not relevant. And it's very different what NWO aims to achieve with rewarding and recognizing versus what maybe the universities want to achieve. Clearly, universities have to look at a broader set of things when they evaluate their personnel. But NWO is about science and it's about research. And the only thing that matters is science and research in our version of recognizing and rewarding. So what NWO does as far as recognizing and rewarding goes is different from what universities do with that subject. And in various articles in the media, these two things get confused. A second thing that I think we want to achieve is that there is more emphasis on when reviewing grant applications, the emphasis should be on the research that will be done more than the research that has been done. Now, clearly there is a correlation between the research that will be done and the research that has been done, but that correlation is not as strong as some people might believe. So we want you to very much in the talent scheme try to find the researchers who have the best potential to achieve the best outcome, and not so much looking at the people who have had the most impact so far. There is a correlation between the two, but the question is, who are the people that will do the most important research in the future? That's an important question to answer. We also wanted to put some in, so basically de-incentivize the system on a few aspects. For example, we think that quality is more important than quantity. So all kinds of indicators that refer exclusively to quantity and not to quality should be de-emphasized in applications. So that's part of the way we have tried to frame the narrative CV discussion, because it's quality that counts and not quantity. If you find quantity very important, then that leads to all kinds of bad incentives in the system, like publishing just incremental research. We sometimes call it like the cheese slice method or whatever. So you have like a body of research and you take a thin slice, you publish it, you take another thin slice and you publish it. It gets you lots of papers, and especially if all these cheese slices cite themselves, you might even get a high H index, but clearly this is all incremental research. And one purpose of this discussion is also to de-incentivize that kind of behavior and to steer more towards quality rather than quantity. Another sort of misconception seems to be that you can no longer publish in Nature or no longer mention citations. And that's also not true. You can still publish in Nature. You should just make sure you do it in an open science way. So that means that you either pay Nature enough to make the paper available to the wider audience, or you do the green version of open science and you put your paper also in the repository, which is openly available. But you can definitely publish in Nature, and it's fine to say that your Nature paper had N citations. It's not forbidden, because that tells you something about the impact that the paper had. That's also an important misconception. And then maybe a third misconception is that the word narrative CV might suggest that we are looking for people who are good at sales, like salespeople, who just blabber away and have like a raving story. And, that's not the point, of course. And it's up to you to critically look at those CVs and to mostly take the things that are supported by evidence into account. And if people have just outrageous claims in their narrative that are not backed up by facts, then you should discount those claims immediately if you're in the committee. So the purpose of the narrative CV is not to look at sales pitches. The point is to look at facts with context. Sometimes we call this an evidence-informed story or an evidence-informed CV. And if whatever is written sounds great, but it's not backed up by evidence, then you should immediately discount that information, because the point is to look at facts. Facts with context instead of facts without context. I realize that there are many issues with these narrative CVs. They are maybe more difficult to read. And I'm sure we can still improve the way we set up the narrative CVs. We should definitely provide some examples of what we think are very good narrative CVs to the community, etc., etc. But I think that's more on the how side of the discussion rather than on the what side of the discussion. Well, I think I'm out of time. I just wanted to make a few points today, and I hope you will enjoy your work for the Vidi committee. You might struggle interpreting some of the narrative CVs. I probably would myself. If you see clear ways on how we can improve the way we organize the narrative CV and the boundary conditions we impose, then again, please communicate all your thoughts to the program coordinators. But I hope you can all, to zero further, agree on the what direction that you have in mind with this, our vision on recognizing and rewarding. So thank you, and I hope you have a productive morning.
Thank you very much, Jan, for these words. Yeah, we are running a bit behind time, but still, I would like, now Jan is here, I would like to give you the opportunity, or I would like to give Jan the opportunity to react to a few points in the chat. I'm not sure if you can see it, Jan. Otherwise, I will read them. Martijn Huinen says the research that had been done is still relevant to judge the quality of researcher.
Martijn,
is Martijn around?
Maybe I can already answer that right now, because that's clearly true. And I'm not saying that it's irrelevant. Is not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that it was overvalued in the past. And there was in the past a one-to-one map was made between maybe the past record of the researcher, and it was immediately extrapolated to the future. And I'm just saying we want to de-emphasize that connection a little bit because we feel like it was overemphasized in the past. There still is clearly a correlation between the two. But for example, if someone has 30% less output in their previous career, it's same quality output, but it's 30% less output, clearly because that person had more teaching duties or whatever, then that person presumably could do the same quality Vidi research as the other person who had 30% more output. So this is just a small example of looking like a bit more into the details of the past achievements and not blindly just looking at a few superficial numbers. That there clearly is a correlation, I'm not denying, and it's important to take that on board. I'm just saying that perhaps in the past, I have been in committees like this myself. With some of my colleagues, the only thing they had was a list of the age indices of the applicants and one or two other parameters, and that was and they never even bothered to read the actual information, and they just looked at those numbers and they threw out random people just based on those very superficial numbers. So if nothing else, this is an encouragement to de-bias yourself and to look a bit in depth at what someone is actually saying and what actually their background is and what they have actually achieved, rather than throwing away all this information and coarse graining everything to one or two numbers. Then the statement that narrative CVs are difficult and time-consuming to judge. And committee members, yeah, it's true. So I think maybe structuring it a bit more and giving good examples and bad examples is definitely something that we should do and should look into. I think also now that more and more funders, including the ERC, are adopting the narrative CV format, I think rapidly, more and more experience will be collected in different places and in Europe, and hopefully this will rapidly converge to some sort of maybe slightly more structured format for a narrative CV that will be helpful for everyone and will also help us to have more examples of what we think are very good narrative CVs and what are like sort of examples of really bad narrative CVs. And I don't have these examples right now, but clearly this is high on the agenda to come up with some of those. Yeah, there is a list of items one can mention already there, but that's not quite the same as like a template and examples, but hopefully that's indeed a good starting point. Yeah, if you have to review science outside of your expertise, you can use indicators. We're also not saying indicators have no value, but please be aware that of your biases when you use those indicators. Because it's there's a lot of, like if you, a field which is very close to my own field, which is experimental high energy physics. This is, for example, where you will see PhD students that have 120,000 citations. Well, clearly that's a useless number. If that's your only number that you work with, then it's ridiculous. So if you look at publications in other fields, be aware that very different fields have very different publishing cultures. And for example, even if you look at theoretical computer science versus artificial intelligence, and you might think that these are fields that are very close together, age indices in artificial intelligence mean something completely different than in theoretical computer science. So there is a lot of, even within subdisciplines, these numbers mean very different things depending on the subdiscipline. So please be very much aware of that.
Jan,
yeah.
We are running a bit behind time, but do you think there are still, is there anything you really would like to address? And otherwise,
I
we'll
was
make a copy
quickly
of this.
scanning.
And
I think we can, if you could collect all these questions, because maybe
Yeah.
later in the morning more questions arise. Maybe you can collect all these questions and we can discuss them later and maybe write a summary response to the entire committee.
That's what we are going to do. Yes. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Jan, for your presentation and answering the questions. I would now like to say a few words about the Vidi procedure, and I will share my screen again. So I hope you can see it. It was a program. Okay, and this is the timeline, the Vidi 21, the timeline of the Vidi 2021 round. In November last year, we received 181 proposals. Just to compare, last round we received only 104 proposals, so that's an increase of about 80 proposals. And this is definitely caused by the Corona situation. And WO offered candidates who were eligible to submit in the 2020 round the possibility to postpone their submission and to retain that right for this 2021 round. And actually quite a few candidates made use of that offer. And that's why we have so many proposals this year. I would say that 150 proposals is more or less normal, as was the case in 2019. For all proposals, we strive for 3 referee reports, in any event at least 2 reports. And all candidates are offered the opportunity to write a rebuttal. And almost all of them do that, of course. The assessment will take place in 3 steps. We will hold interview selection meetings, as you all know, for 7 clusters in the week of the 7th of March. And I will show these clusters later. And then in April, we have all the interviews. And finally, a domain-wide assessment committee decides on the final ranking in May. And I will discuss how this works, how these steps work in practice in more detail later. And of course, finally, the granting decision will be made by our board, and that will be mid-June if everything goes well. Okay, this is a schematic summary of the whole procedure. So 180 proposals were sent out for review. Based on the research disciplines, we divided them in 7 interview selection clusters. I'll show you the clusters later. And we can invite around 50% of the candidates for an interview. So we will have about 90 interviews divided over 3 interview clusters. And then a domain-wide assessment committee will decide on the final ranking. We will probably have a budget for 45 to maybe 50 grants. So that's a nice award rate, I would say, of 25 to 28%, of course, depending on the final budget, which still needs to be decided on. And anyway, this will be quite good anyway. And last year we even had an award rate of 29%. Yeah, but that was, of course, because we had a relatively low number of submissions. Maybe a last remark about this slide. In the event that, let's say, 2 or more proposals are rated equally around the granting cutoff, that's what we call an ex aequo situation, then the preference will be given to the proposal submitted by a female candidate. So NWO applies, yeah, what we call in Dutch, a voorkeursbeleid. Okay, so there are 7 interview selection clusters, as you can see. I can say that the division is more or less comparable to what we had in the last round. However, we had to split the 63 life sciences proposals into 2 interview selection clusters, 6 and 7. Each cluster has 1 or 2 cluster secretaries, and they are also participating in this session, and you can meet them or virtually meet them later during the breakouts. So I will now discuss the 3 assessment steps in more detail. First of all, the interview selection. As I said, we have 7 interview selection meetings in the week of the 7th of March. Yesterday, most of you were already invited to start pre-assessing the proposals, to prepare for the discussion during the meeting in March. And this year you will do that directly in our ISAC system. Of course, if you as a committee member have a personal interest with a candidate, then you should wait in the WebEx lobby. You cannot assess that candidate. The discussion is based on the proposal itself, the referee reports and the rebuttal, of course. Yeah, maybe I should say or stress that unfortunately referee reports are not always gender neutral. Sometimes you may read a he or she in a report, and we really would like to urge you to to try and to assess with a sort of gender neutral view as much as possible, although we understand that it's not easy if you read a he or a she. Another thing I would like to say is that the task of the committee members is to weigh the referee's views. In principle, you cannot introduce any new arguments into the discussion. However, if you strongly feel this is really necessary, then we have to ask that candidate for a new rebuttal, or of course, if the candidate is invited for an interview, then this issue could be addressed during the interview. Okay, so each proposal is assessed by 5 committee members. We have divided the proposals among the committee members, of course, taking into account your preference whenever possible. The assessment scores are between 1 excellent and 9 poor for each criterion. Please try to use this scale, this range as much as possible, of course, if appropriate. And another advice is try to be as distinctive as possible when scoring the proposals. And after the discussion of each proposal, the individual scores can be adjusted, of course, by the scoring committee members. That's why we have the discussion. That's why we have the meeting, of course. Committee members use different ranges of the scale. Some committee members tend to give higher scores. Others give lower scores. That's I would call that human nature. And by normalizing these scores, these differences are cancelled out. And in this way, each scoring committee member correctly contributes to the average score. Then we prepare a cluster ranking based on the normalized total scores of all candidates at the end of the interview selection meeting. The resulting ranking will then be presented to the cluster committee members, and then the committee determines which candidates will be invited for an interview, and that will be about 50%. So this is step 2, the interviews. As I said before, we will have a budget of about 45 to 50 grants. That's a nice award rate, I think, of 25 to 28%. We plan to have about 90 interviews. That's twice the number of grants. And that's also important. The summary of the discussion during the interview selection meeting per candidate is input for the interview. And in this way, we will transfer information, as I would like to say, from the interview selection to the interview phase, so that information is not lost. I think that's important to note. The 7 interview selection clusters will be combined into 3 interview clusters, and I'll show you later how this will look like and how we will do that. And within each interview cluster, about 4, maybe 5 sessions are probably needed. And we can do, let's say, 7, maybe 8 interviews per session per day, but that's the maximum, I think. And these sessions are already scheduled for most interview clusters. So we request committee members to participate in 2 interview sessions. We ask you to already reserve 4 dates for this. until we can make a final planning, and we can only do that after the interview selection meetings, because then we know which candidates are invited for an interview. And then for each interview clusters, the scores of all the committee members from all the sessions are merged into a single ranking. All right, so this is just to show you how the 7 interview clusters will be combined into 3 interview clusters. Interview cluster A is a combination of 3 interview selection clusters of, let's say, adjacent research disciplines. And the other interview clusters are a combination of 2 interview selection clusters. And as said before, we will have about 90 interviews. And that's around, let's say, 30 interviews per interview cluster. So we discussed the first 2 steps, so the interview selection and interviews. And then we still need to discuss step 3, the domain-wide committee decides on the final ranking. For each interview cluster, there will be a ranking. So we will have 3 interview cluster rankings A, B, and C. And these need to be merged into one final ranking. And that's the task of the domain-wide assessment committee, which in any case includes the chairs of the interview sessions. They have to merge these 3 rankings into a final ranking. Yeah, I will not go into detail at the moment, but at NWO, we will prepare a few options, how this merge could be done. And then the committee will discuss these options and choose one of these. And then this will result in a funding advice. And then last but not least, the granting decision will be made, of course, by the Domain Science Board, and that will be around mid-June, as I said before. Okay, so this is my my last slide, showing the 3 assessment criteria and their relative weights. The second criterion is new, actually, for this round. Instead of knowledge utilization, as we used to call it, we now speak about scientific and/or societal impact. And my colleague Eva Blokker will further explain this to you in a minute. More details about these criteria can be found in the call for proposal, of course. Well, that's actually what I would like to say for now. I will stop sharing my screen, and there are quite a few questions. Actually, and running a bit. We have some time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. As I said before, we will make a copy of the chat. Is there anyone? I find it a bit difficult to make a selection, so maybe if you raise your hand and ask your question, we can do 1 or 2 questions. Are there any volunteers?
Erik, I can highlight a question.
Yes, please do.
This is a question from Frank Fieldhouse. He says, it's not very clear to me how pre-scores affect the interview selection. Are they merely the basis for discussion, or are they to be used directly, with possibly minor adjustments only?
Mm-hmm. It's yeah, the pre-assessment is a preparation for the meeting. So it gives indeed an indication of the, let's say, the views of the committee members, and it helps you to give an idea of the quality of the candidates, but it's not decisive. It could change, and that's what happens as well. So I would, it's a sort of preparation for the meeting.
I think the rest of
Is
the
that clear?
questions mostly have been answered by the secretaries already.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we can continue on the questions also on the breakout sessions later.
I think so, yeah. Is there anything Jan would like to add as a in reaction to the presentation or question that was just asked? No. Okay, well then, Evelien, that's a very good suggestion. So I would now like to invite Eva then to tell us more about scientific and or societal impact.
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Eva Blokker. And together with Loes van Bey, I am the secretary of the Vidi clusters, Mathematics and Computer Science. We are going to watch a short video about the criterion, scientific and or societal impact. After that, I have a few PowerPoint slides to discuss some points of attention. If finally, if time permits, there's room for questions. But we will now look at the video.
Goedendag, mijn naam is Irma Sibrasse en ik ben beleidsmedewerker bij NWO. Vandaag wil ik u een toelichting geven op het criterium wetenschappelijke en of maatschappelijke impact. Een van de criteria waar u op zult oordelen is wetenschappelijke en of maatschappelijke impact. Dit criterium wordt door NWO toegepast binnen calls waarbij expliciet ruimte is voor fundamenteel wetenschappelijk onderzoek en waarbij er niet verplicht een focus ligt op maatschappelijke impact. We gaan hier zo uitgebreider op in, maar eerst is het nuttig om nog even te benoemen wat we bedoelen met beide vormen van impact. De definitie van wetenschappelijke impact is de impact van onderzoek op het eigen aanverwante of bredere wetenschapsveld. Bij maatschappelijke impact gaat het juist om maatschappelijke, zijnde culturele, economische, industriële, ecologische of sociale veranderingen die mede het gevolg zijn van door onderzoek gegenereerde kennis en kunde. Beide vormen van impact zitten in het criterium wetenschappelijke en of maatschappelijke impact. Er is geen onderscheid in waarde tussen beide vormen van impact. We laten het aan aanvragers om zelf een keuze te maken over het type impact waar ze zich op willen richten en te motiveren waarom de keuze bij het project past. Hoe u een voorstel beoordeelt is dus ook afhankelijk van die keuze. Als een voorstel zijn focus richt op wetenschappelijke impact, dan zijn de onderdelen van het criterium die gaan over maatschappelijke impact dus ook niet van belang en andersom. Als een aanvrager ervoor kiest om een focus te hebben op beide vormen van impact, dan kan dat ook. Alle onderdelen van het criterium zijn dan relevant, maar hoeven niet per se gelijkwaardig te zijn, uitgewerkt alsof het de enige focus was. Het moet wel een significant verschil zijn ten opzichte van een voorstel dat zich richt op slechts één vorm van impact. Een kleine nuance hiervan is wel op zijn plaats. Impact is waarschijnlijker als er in de planning van het project al aandacht voor is. De keuze voor één focus betekent daarom niet dat een onderzoeker de andere vorm van impact helemaal geen aandacht hoeft te geven. We verwachten zelfs altijd dat ze er nog wel iets over zeggen. Daarom is het ook een onderdeel van het criterium hoe ze proportioneel aandacht geven aan de niet gekozen vorm van impact. Dus aan maatschappelijke impact als hun primaire focus ligt op wetenschappelijke impact en vice versa. Dat kan zijn dat ze kansen zien en daar een kleine stap in willen zetten in het onderzoek, of dat ze nog geen kansen zien, maar dat ze vooraf hebben bedacht hoe ze tijdens het onderzoek oog blijven houden voor onvoorziene kansen. Om het specifieker te maken, bij een focus op wetenschappelijke impact vragen we dus uw oordeel over de potentie en relevantie van de onderzoeksresultaten voor het eigen en aanverwante vakgebied. De potentie en relevantie van de onderzoeksresultaten voor het bredere wetenschapsveld. En daarnaast over de motivatie voor de focus. Maakt de kandidaat daarin duidelijk dat de keuze passend is bij het voorstel. en hoe er proportioneel aandacht wordt gegeven aan maatschappelijke impact. Die aandacht zal dus bij deze keuze beperkter zijn dan de aandacht voor wetenschappelijke impact. Anders klopt de focus niet. Het gaat er vooral om dat er plannen of ideeën zijn en niet zozeer hoe uitgebreid die zijn. Bij een focus op maatschappelijke impact vragen we uw oordeel over de toegevoegde waarde van het project voor maatschappelijke impact, de potentie voor maatschappelijke impact op de korte en lange termijn en een visie op de manieren waarop het voorgestelde onderzoek tot maatschappelijke impact kan leiden. En daarnaast wederom over de motivatie voor de focus en hoe er proportioneel aandacht wordt gegeven aan de wetenschappelijke impact. Ook hier kan het laatste dus altijd beperkt zijn, anders klopt de focus niet. Als de focus ligt op beide vormen van impact, dan wordt er gekeken naar alle voorgaande onderdelen, met uitzondering van de aandacht voor de niet gekozen focus, aangezien deze er niet is. Er hoeft niet op beide vormen precies evenveel aandacht te liggen, maar voor beide wel significant meer dan als ze een focus hadden gekozen voor één vorm van impact. Dit is dus het gehele criterium wetenschappelijke en of maatschappelijke impact. Ik wil nogmaals benadrukken dat er dus keuze is voor onderzoekers om een focus te kiezen en daarmee dus ook op welk element in de beoordeling de focus ligt. Er is geen voorkeur vanuit NWO voor de ene vorm van impact of de andere. De keuze die de onderzoeker maakt aan zich speelt geen rol in de beoordeling. Hoe de keuze past bij het onderzoek natuurlijk wel, als onderdeel van de motivering. Ik wens u veel succes bij de beoordeling.
So one note, the video was recorded after the text for the criterion was adjusted. Namely, the video mentions the added value of the project for societal impact. However, this is not yet explicitly stated in the criteria. Now I will show you a few PowerPoint slides. Yeah, you're seeing it right now. Unfortunately, I need to address some inconsistencies in the criteria for this video round, for which at first I would like to apologize. There are 3 criteria in the call for proposals for the Vidi 2021 round. First one is the quality of the research. The second one refers to the scientific and or social impact. The third one refers to the quality of the researcher. And I highlighted the first 2, as those are the ones that need some attention. The call text mentions some points for the quality of the research. So that is the first criterion. Except the one that I highlighted in red, that is actually referring to scientific impact, as it says the potential to make an important contribution to the advancement of science. And since we cannot score the same subject twice, we ask you to ignore this bullet point. So in the end, scientific quality will be scored in the first criterion and the scientific impact in the second criterion. Now a little bit of a recap. So the applicants are asked to choose a focus on impact. If an applicant chooses the focus on scientific impact, the applicant is asked to answer what is the potential and relevance of the research for one's own and related disciplines and of the research for the wider scientific field. If the applicant chooses to focus on societal impact, the applicant answers the potential for societal impact in the short and long term. And what is clearly different from scientific impact is that for societal impact, we ask a vision of the way or ways in which the research could lead to societal impact. And lastly, if an applicant chooses to focus on both forms of impact, all 4 criteria above apply. So again, the big difference between scientific and social impact is that for social impact, we ask a vision. It's not an impact plan, but it's a vision of the way which the research could lead to social impacts. What I would like to address is that indeed in the call text, you can see that it says, okay, scientific includes among others, and then it sums up the 2 points that we just discussed. However, in the review form, you see that the first point actually overlaps with these 2 points. It asks, please comment on the potential for scientific impact and relevance of the envisioned research for the advancement of 1, the research field, and related fields, and 2, the broader scientific community. However, you see here that the second point asks, please comment on the way in which the applicant proposed to establish scientific impact of the envisioned research. However, this question suggests that for a focus on scientific impact, a vision is asked, but this is not stated in the call. Note that, as discussed on the slide before, that a vision is asked for a focus on social impact. Therefore, when you assess scientific impact, please do not take referee calls about this point that is now crossed in red into account. Namely, the assessment is based on the criteria in the proposal. And the last thing that I want to address is that if an applicant chooses a focus on 1 impact, then you also have a non-chosen focus. And as you can see in the call text, it says, besides impact, the assessment committee, as part of this criterion, will also weigh the degree of the presence of processes, factors, or plans to enhance chances and unforeseen chances on the non-chosen focus of impact during the runtime of the project. Well, the review form states as the following: please comment on how attention is paid to unforeseen opportunities for the non-chosen focus of impact. However, as you can see, unforeseen is not in brackets. So it can happen that, for instance, referees did not comment on how attention is paid to foreseen opportunities. And it could be that the committee has important points about this. But note that the candidate should then be asked for a new rebuttal, or if the candidate is invited for an interview, it can be discussed there. So, take-home message: please score scientific quality in the first criterion and scientific impact in the second criterion. Please note that there are 2 discrepancies between the review form and call for proposals. And I will now stop sharing the presentation. I saw that there were a lot of questions in the chat. Maybe for now, I give the floor to Eric. And
Yeah, thank you, Eva. There are indeed a few questions in the chat. I also echo the words of Eva. So apologies, there are a few indeed discrepancies, and we cannot repair that at this stage, unfortunately. But what we can do, and that was an excellent suggestion by John, that is that it's a bit too much information right now for you. We would already like to alert you to this, but before the interview selection meeting, we will inform you precisely by mail or before we start the meeting what you need to pay attention to. So I agree, it's a bit maybe too much for now to remember.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
So with let me see, it's now almost 11, so we can discuss this further during the breakouts a little bit, and again we will answer you by mail as well. And I would now like to invite Evelien and she will talk about assessing inclusively. Evelien, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Erik. I will briefly share my screen. Do you see the full PowerPoint? Yes? Okay.
Yes,
Thank
we
you.
can see it.
Yes.
Great, thank you. So, thank you. My name is Evelien Mescher. I'm a policy officer at the Dutch Research Council and also a secretary at the Vidi rounds. And I'm now going to briefly explain a bit about the Inclusive Assessment Initiative. Jan de Boer already told a bit about background, but I'm going to tell specifically about this initiative, a bit about the background. Then we're going to go to the fun part straight away, which is watching the movie with different tips and tricks that you can use as an assessment committee for a more inclusive assessment. And thereafter, I will just briefly discuss some tips and tricks we can directly use during our assessment meeting. And I'll just want to say, we are there as secretaries to help you implement these different tips and tricks as good as possible. And what I would also like to emphasize is that these are guidelines and these need to be tailored to your committee and use what can help you to do an as inclusive assessment as possible. So I'm going to explain a bit about the assessment initiative because NWO really wants to be an organization where everyone feels welcome and can bring out the best of themselves and their teams. Which means, in other words, that NWO strives to be a diverse organization with an inclusive culture. And we do this by focusing on two different aspects, which is the granting policy, as well as the employer's policy. And as we're here gathered today for the assessment of the Vidi proposals, I'm now going to focus on the granting policy. And NWO really wants to advance research with both scientific as well as societal impacts. And scientific research showed that in order to reach this impact, research really needs to be conducted by people with diverse experience, perspectives, and backgrounds. And in order to reach this, NWO really reached out to experts with the question to optimize our evaluation process and also broaden our often limited image of what a good scientist or also a good proposal is. The main question was, many things were going already really well, and the assessment procedure, many things are going really well, and the assessment committees are doing a really great job. But how can we do better? And that is what we focused on. And this quote really says it all. The idea is to deliberately structure how you present information and options. You don't take away individuals' rights to decide or tell them what they should do. You just make it easier for them to reach more rational decisions. And that's exactly what we do as the secretaries from the Vidi rounds. We really want to be your critical friend. We want to watch over your shoulder and maybe help you with making more rational decisions, or maybe just point you in the right direction. But you as a committee as a whole are all responsible together with us to make this inclusive assessment procedure happening. And this in the end resulted in 2 different videos, which is one video for the written assessment. And I would really like to ask you all to watch this video before you write your pre-assessment, because this really can help you with some simple tips and tricks how to do that. But also there's a video for the assessment committee meeting. And this is the video I just want to watch with you. So Tijmen, I want to ask you if you could share this video. I don't know if I have to start unsharing.
I think so. Yes.
Okay, I did.
The Dutch Research Council wants to advance research with both scientific and societal impact. Therefore, research needs to be conducted by people with all kinds of different experiences. A diverse range of perspectives enables innovative and creative research. That is why the Dutch Research Council is always on the lookout for suitable applicants and consortia to carry out this research. Our evaluators play a vital role in this quest. In this video, the Dutch Research Council calls attention to the evaluation process. Evaluators implicitly construct a frame of reference that an applicant should fit based on aspects that differ, for example, per discipline or research programme. This frame is currently rather one-sided, which results in a limiting ideal image of suitable applicants. This ideal image is implicit but also normative. We are therefore more inclined to choose an applicant who better fits this ideal image over somebody who fits it less well. This determines who is considered to be suitable and who is not. For example, we have an ideal image about what a scientific career should look like, but it could also look like this or like this. We should keep asking ourselves, will our limited frame of reference actually lead to research with impact? To further improve the assessment process, we should let ourselves be less guided by a one-sided ideal image. In order to do so, this ideal image needs to be made explicit and should be expanded during the assessment process. Now, let's consider several concrete ways of doing this. When the selection committee comes together, group dynamics are crucial. Such dynamics may bring about challenges that lead to a suboptimal assessment. Therefore, agree upon the meeting structure and code of conduct within the committee prior to the assessment. For example, agree upon the same amount of speaking time for every committee member and alternate between who speaks first. Pay attention to this throughout the entire meeting. Similar agreements should also be made for the group discussion about the proposals and applicants. Are the criteria provided by the Dutch Research Council clear for everybody? What is the weighting of each criterion, and how will the criteria be interpreted and possibly compensated? Make this explicit together so that you are not subconsciously led by a one-sided ideal image. Agree to be alert to biased language, such as language influenced by ideal images, which will result in one proposal gaining an advantage over another. Such agreements help to create a group dynamic in which everybody can be held accountable if the made agreements are deviated from. An interview or presentation can be part of the assessment process. For this, also agree on a clear structure in advance. That means discussing together which topics must be addressed and who poses which questions. Make notes and take the agreed-upon criteria into account. Limit your assessment to the content provided by the applicant. Avoid taking irrelevant characteristics or informal interactions into account. Use your notes as a basis for your contribution during the committee meeting. Also, when presentations and interviews are discussed, be aware of biased language or arguments that are not relevant for the assessment. Hold each other accountable if that happens. Spend an equal amount of time on discussing each application. And don't just motivate why proposals fail to meet the criteria, but also make sure to motivate why they do meet the criteria. Finally, never discuss proposals and applicants with other committee members outside of the formal meeting. These were some concrete ways to improve the assessment process. Science with impact requires different perspectives. Let us expand our frame of reference together to make room in the assessment process for a multifaceted image of suitable applicants. That's how we work together towards innovative and creative research.
So thank you all for watching. I already received a question from Zila about training, inclusive assessment training. And this is indeed something that all Dutch Research Council's employees receive a training. in order to be able to implement all tips and tricks from this video as good as possible. Also, the referees will receive the video for the written assessment before they start their written assessment. And I understand that today you have received so much information and watched at so many movies that this might be a bit much. So we try to make it as easy as possible for you, and just all the tips and tricks from the video can be looked back on the fact sheet. And this fact sheet will be sent to you, but it's also available on the website, including also the 2 different movies. So you can check everything on your own time, on your own pace at a different moment. The only thing I want to emphasize is that you don't literally have to interpret every tip and trick on this fact sheet. It's just what works best for you as a committee. And we are there to help you with this. We all receive training, so we should be able to help you as good as possible with this. I'm now going to just explain a few tips and tricks which might be very valuable at the start of your meeting. So for the interview selections, but also for the interviews. The first one is, prior to the assessments, agree on the structure of the meeting and the code of conduct, and address these agreements during the meeting when necessary. And that's not only the task of the secretary from the Dutch Research Council, but it's also, you can all do that from the committee. At the moment you notice something that is not the same as the code of conduct you agreed upon, then you can just mention that during the meeting. There should always be time at the start of the assessment meeting to explicate the assessment criteria and how they should be applied. So we all watched this movie about, for example, the knowledge utilization and scientific impacts, but we can all also explicate it at the start of the assessment meeting to make sure that everyone is on the same page. Also, you can decide to give the same amount of speaking time to each committee member and alternate who may speak first. We don't want to tell you to use a clock to really show how much time everyone has. It's just that you keep into account that everyone had the opportunity to speak if they want to speak. And agree on who asked which questions during that interview. That also saves time during the interview because you also don't have all the time of the world. So make sure you agree beforehand who asked which questions during an interview. And I wrote etc. because this list is quite long. So please check it on the fact sheets and also on the website. There are also multiple literature references you can check if you're interested in the backgrounds. And for now, I would just like to wish you a lot of fun as well during the assessments, and good luck. If you want to look up all the information, you can go to this website. If you have any questions regarding this inclusive assessment initiative, please write us an email and we will forward this also to the persons responsible for this. So thank you very much. And my series starts talking as usual.
Thank you, Evelien. Perfectly on time, 11:11. Yeah, as you said, that's always a danger of these meetings. It's too much information, and it's also online, so that's yeah, yeah. I think it's time for a break now, and we can go into detail in the breakout sessions. What I would like to do is to show you the division over the 3 rooms. Let me see if I can do that. Yeah, I hope you can see that. So this is how we have divided the committee members over the 3 rooms. Don't worry if your name is not on it. And the only thing you have to do is to accept and then the room number. So you will receive a message on your screen. Okay, I think that's all for now. Let me see if I. Oh, it's too much. We'll stop sharing. Okay. I would like to thank the speakers and Jan in particular. for his interesting talk and about the Vidi. I would now like to say that we will start at 11:25 and then we will go into the breakout sessions. So you have, let's say, 10 minutes or so for a short break. So thank you very much, and I hope many of you will join the breakout sessions. Okay, thank you. Bye bye for now.